Welcome to the weekly series Built to be Heard. It's live. I'm not on video tonight simply because I was running a little bit behind today. I had a full day of work and some Zoom calls, but I wanted to get my workout in. So I was running a little bit behind and I did not get myself even a little bit camera ready. So I'm just going to focus on the audio. The main thing is I want to share this theme with you today, talk through some of these ideas in a conversation. And of course, I would love to hear what you have to say about them. Okay. So the theme tonight really is about stop playing it safe. And I'm encouraging you to be a little bit delusional, or as some people may say, delulu. I think that's cute. So, the unconventional advice that I'm throwing out there for you tonight is to be simply a little delulu. Because if you don't if you if you don't give yourself a little bit of that extra oomph, that extra boost that you need, people will talk you out of doing what you're talking about. They will talk you out of your dreams. A lot of people will. And if you have this drive inside of you, you're responsible for your life, right? You are responsible to make those choices, to do those things. Today's Wednesday. I like to have the theme. I've followed this for years as far as whatever it takes Wednesday. And that really comes down to knowing that life does not go as we planned all the time. Our businesses do not go as we plan. There are so many statistics that people make business plans and less than 30% of them actually follow them because things come up, right? Or there are funding hurdles, or there are life challenges that get into, that you have to juggle around with your businesses. So I'm really talking to the person who's been responsible most of their life and understanding that you've done the work, you've built the expertise, you have the evidence, right? You've not jumped at every shiny object, or if you did, you learned to stop doing that, right? And you probably don't really enjoy drawing attention to yourself. You may tend to be more introverted like me, but of course, if we're going to work with people, if we're going to help people solve problems, we need to become a little bit more extroverted. We need to be able to speak to people, right? In front of rooms. We need to talk one-on-one with people. So there may be a bigger opportunity that you're seeking. There may be a bigger client that you're going after, a bigger role, right? A business that you've been thinking about expanding but maybe, just wasn't the right, you didn't have the right drive until now. Because I don't want to say it wasn't the right time, because in a lot of cases, I think we all know that it's not usually the right time. We have to just make a decision that we're going to do it, and then we have to problem solve our way through it, right? Maybe there's a particular stage that you want to be on, like TEDx or NBC or ABC, an introduction that you've been kind of, wavering. Should you ask this super connector if he or she could introduce you? But the next chapter in your life and in our lives is not going to be coming from becoming more reasonable. I really believe it becomes from being a little bit more delusional, right? And you can achieve your goals by being a little bit delulu, because you can tell yourself that, okay, if this particular thing doesn't work out, this way of building the pipeline or this bid that I'm working on, then, you're going to have the drive to know that you will not give up. And that really is the thing. It's about being resilient. And, my dad, and you've heard me talk about this, my dad used to tell me, keep a low profile. And while that served me well when I was younger, and I understand that that came from a place of love and wisdom, the fact is that there is wisdom in humility, right? There is wisdom in doing the work instead of constantly telling everyone you're doing the work or going to do it or you're going to get around to it. But I've also had to learn something, that there's a difference between being humble and choosing to hide, right? And there's a difference between being responsible and constantly playing it safe, because I can tell you that we can't get to where we're going if we play it safe. It just doesn't work that way. We have to be able to take calculated risks. We have to be able to commit. If we believe in something, we have to be able to commit to doing whatever it takes. And, I know this has been around forever. Well, not forever, but, a while. I don't remember exactly when Simon Sinek came out with this, but it was probably 15 years ago. And I love Simon Sinek's work. Okay. But it's not always the why that gets you through. It really isn't, because I've seen so many times where, that can work. Don't get me wrong. It can work sometimes for people. But especially if you are in an entrepreneurial space, let's say you're not in corporate, right? And if you're in an entrepreneurial space and you have limited funding, or you don't have the right strategies to get the right people in the right rooms, that why is only going to carry you so far. It is. It's just, that's how it works. And so you really can't just play it safe. You have to be willing to take some risks. You have to be willing to fail so that you can problem solve your way to success, right? And you can be humble, and then nobody knows like what you're capable of. And you can be responsible and never take a chance, right? So the thing is, you have to be so realistic that you talk yourself right out of the life that you actually want. And if you do that, then you're not going to get to where you really want to be, right? Because, we've heard this before. We know we tend to be our own worst enemy, right? We tend to talk ourselves out of things so that we can play things safe. And I just know that no matter what segment of life you're looking at. I mean, I've built territories from ground up. I've built businesses. I've competed as an athlete. I've continued my education. I've walked in rooms without knowing exactly what was going to happen next. And I just got to the point, I wasn't always like this. So it's like you must condition yourself. You must be a little bit delulu, right? But I've conditioned myself so that I am ready for anything. I tell myself I'm ready for anything, because it wasn't just walking into rooms. It was when I was doing the 30 to 32 Zoom calls every week. I didn't know who was going to be on the other side of that screen, and I didn't know if there were going to be some tech issues on my end or their end. So I would just condition myself to say, I can be ready for anything. I'm ready for anything. I can help people problem solve their way through it. I was doing a lot of role play coaching, so again, not knowing everybody's background, just making sure that I was ready for anything, right? And if you set your mind to that, and you do the work, and meaning you tell yourself, I'm ready for anything, then you can build the evidence. Okay. And I know that sounds like a little bit backward, or that might sound a little bit delusional, but that is actually the way that I have found to be successful. And you cannot play it safe in most cases and get to where you need to be. You have to evaluate risk. You have to mitigate risks, obviously. You have to look at the evidence that you're building, and just know that your mind, you are going to hear phrases in your mind like, oh, I don't know, I'm not ready for this yet. Or maybe I need another credential. Maybe I need another course. Maybe I need another graduate class, and then maybe I'll feel ready. Maybe I should wait because there are things going on with my family. You're going to hear all these things that you say to yourself, or you might hear, I'm not good enough. Someone else is better. But I can tell you that discernment can quietly turn into fear if you're not careful, right? Because there's a difference between saying I've looked at this carefully and it isn't right for me versus I'm scared, so I'm going to keep analyzing and I'm going to keep putting this off until I can justify not doing it, or maybe if enough people tell me not to do it, right? So there is a difference between both of those things. I'd like to hear what your opinion is on that, because sometimes I'm thinking about it really means I'm afraid to find out what happens if I actually go for it, if I actually take that next step, right? So here's the challenge I have for you, because I've heard this, hundreds and hundreds of times. I've done over 5,900 coaching sessions in the last 12 years, since 2014, and I've heard those things from people. But my challenge to you right now is, what would happen if you allowed yourself to just be 10% more delusional about yourself? That you actually said, I am scared, and this can be considered somewhat delusional. I'm scared, so, I'm just going to go ahead and do it anyways and push through it, right? Instead of allowing yourself to give into those statements and talking yourself out of it, right? So what if you allowed yourself to be just like 10% more delusional, and you did reach out to the person that you thought, could be a super connector for you. You did pitch that client with permission, of course, that you were somewhat hesitant to approach. You went ahead and raised your hand when you were, in your class. You started a conversation with someone, even though you tend to be introverted, and you really knew that even though you were doing these things, it didn't guarantee a yes, but you were going to be able to collect evidence, right? And you decided that you're not going to accept someone else's no for an answer, right? Because we do it all the time. And maybe you'll catch yourself next time, since we've talked about this, but I've done it too. I've said, oh, well, they probably won't respond, or they won't hire me, or they won't introduce me, or, they won't be interested. But we have to do it anyways. And then let the prospect tell you no. In sales coaching, one of the biggest lessons that I learned was to allow the prospect to bring up the pricing objection. Because I know earlier on in sales, I would just be thinking, because of my own limiting beliefs, I would just be thinking, oh, this is going to be too much, I'm going to offer a discount right away. Now, this isn't to be confused with like limited time offers, because limited time offers are great. Limited time offers are helping your right people make a decision, okay? But you cannot decide for your prospect. You have to allow them to make their own decision. What you can do is, like I said, offer limited time offers. Try to inspire them to make a quicker decision without like pushing them. Because if they don't make a decision, they're going to stay where they are. So don't take that away from them. And be unreasonable about what you want. And that doesn't mean reckless, right? Like I said, we have to be delusional to sometimes keep going, because sometimes people are very cruel. If you ever, I try not to scroll too much on social media because I just really don't like it. I don't watch the news. I don't like some of the negative comments that people make. And you really have to be relentless about protecting your peace. And if something upsets you, then don't watch it. Don't look at it. I When I moved out to Chicago in the 90s, that's when I stopped watching the news, because I realized that every day it was just different people's names. It was the same thing though. People were getting killed, people were getting shot. And I thought, I don't really need to see this. And nowadays, because of the news all being around us and sometimes not knowing what's true or what's not, we're going to find out when we do, check our trusted sources, and that'll be just fine. But you can make the choice not to overconsume the news so that it's affecting your mood. You have to protect your peace, right? You can be discerning about how you get out there. You can change the plan, you can adjust the timeline, but you have to get moving. So sometimes you just need that goal to, like I said, be a little bit more delusional to get started, so that you can just get out there and start problem solving your way through things, because you have something worth figuring out. You were meant and built to be heard. Okay. There's something in you driving you. So you need to not quiet that. And, I know we're almost to September. So I would say, what do you have to lose, right? Stop playing it safe, because if you do play it safe, right? If you do keep a low profile, that has consequences as well. You will not get to where you want to be. So I have two questions for you tonight. Where are you being reasonable when what you really need is to replace that reasonable thought with just a little extra courage, right? That's the first question. So, where are you being reasonable when what you really need is just a little dose of courage so that you can get out there more, go prospect more, whether it be online or, in real life, ask for those referrals. Start conversations so you can make more connections. And the second question is, if you were willing to be just a little bit more delusional, what is it that you would go after? Like if you did allow yourself to be 10% more delusional, what is it that you would go after? Would you go through, to that next income milestone with your business? Would you go and hire two more people to, to take some of the work off your plate, so that you can focus on your CEO duties, or what your next level is in your company for your your strategic plan? I want to hear what your unreasonable goal is, and maybe putting it into words is the first step toward actually doing something about it and allowing yourself to have that courage that you need to get to where you're looking to get. And I'm not suggesting in any way, shape, or form that you ignore reality, that you don't mitigate risks. And of course, use your discernment and do your homework, but pay attention to the evidence, right? And don't confuse safe with being smart. They're not always the same thing. And also don't, stay playing small because you pride yourself in being humble. You can still be humble and you can play big. So sometimes you just have to believe that you can do this, that you can be a little bit more delusional, and then you can gather the evidence, right? Because you're doing the work. So you'll have the evidence, you'll have the use cases. And sometimes, like I said, and I've learned this for myself, you have to become a little bit more unreasonable. You have to, because other people will try to talk you out of things because they're trying to protect you. And you also have to stop keeping such a low profile, because while it may have served you well if you weren't in business for yourself, if you weren't moving up the corporate ladder, keeping a low profile does not help you get to the next level. You weren't meant to blend in. You were built to be heard. And I'm looking forward to hearing people's thoughts. Please do comment if you're listening to the recording, if you're here live. I'd love to hear the answers to your questions. And I'll look forward to seeing you next week. I have a special, I can't even speak. I have a special guest for us next week. So we will be doing the Built to Be Heard series at 11:30 a.m. Central Time. Please do tune in, and I will see you then. Take care.